So at this time, I'd like to turn the mic over to Brian Connolly, our CEO of Healthy Adventure. He's the only one you haven't heard from yet. So Brian is going to be our moderator for the panel discussion tonight, which we hope is going to be a lively discussion. And he'll explain to you how it's all going to work. Brian.
Thank you, Lynn. And before we start, I just would like to let everybody know what an absolute honor it is to be able to be in the position of bringing people to events like this around the world. I've been organizing events for about 15 years, but they've never been with such quality as we have at this symposium. And I'm just really honored not only to be able to interact with our speakers, but all of you who make it possible for us to do the job that we truly love to do. Now, just a couple of simple logistics. We're going to ask each one of the speakers the same question, so that you can get a little better related to them and know some of their deep, dark, intimate secrets. We're also then, after asking a couple of questions that each speaker will answer, we're then going to open the floor so that you can come to this microphone and then ask your question. And then after your question's answered, please sit down and we'll call the next person. Okay, so on that note, I think one of the, we talked about amongst ourselves, and one of the things that inspires us to learn from all of these speakers is the information they have, but we don't really know what inspired them to embark upon this journey. So we're going to ask each one of you if you would just let us know what particular event, person, or insight that inspired you to embark upon this journey of leadership and educating people in the areas of expertise that you all have. So Victoris, can we pass the mic down to the father of living foods and co-founder of Hippocrates Health Institute?
Thank you. Congratulations, all of you, for being on this exciting adventure in both consciousness, holism, and spirituality, as well as family values. So it's a great place to share and experience the future, what it's going to be looking like. For we are creating the future, and each one of you are superheroes just by participating on this adventure. My own background was basically sickness all my life. As early as childhood and onward, migraine started at the age of 6, and it became a phenomena that pain was basically a companion, and I thought that was the normal way that life should be. But I had one belief system, and that was what really kept me afloat from doing myself in, and that was basically I believed that there was a better way. I didn't even know that that had any meaning to me, but somehow I had a belief. What value was, the way I was living, I was actually on a very fast suicidal pace, so that by the time 30, I think I could have been already dead. I mean, there were years where I was on 3 packs of cigarettes, 20 cups of coffee.
That was good. That was really good.
At the same time, drinking and taking tranquilizers. Was arthritic and had a lot of all kind of complications. There goes that cough. I'm not familiar with all the spices that I'm enjoying here at the feast, and some of them seems to be creating a little challenge in my throat. So excuse me for a second.
I think you're having cigarette flashbacks. What was your favorite brand?
Marlboro, because it was Western. I love dairy products. You know, the more acidic you are, the more drawn you'll be toward something to help to neutralize. Well, of course, that left me petrified. So I was already, by the time I was in my mid-20s, arthritic with advanced cardiovascular degeneration. Eventually, I was also in a very fast-paced career, a type A personality, and I saw two of my buddies die on the job in their 30s, heart attacks. We worked 24/7, 365 days a year, no vacations, and we took times away from our computer only to rest up for the next program. So at that kind of life, I collapsed. I lost all sensitivity, feeling, and result was I had a choice. I went to the medical doctors, and I had a long history with medical community, and I was never very satisfied. I thought they were doing things that, instead of educating me, they were endangering me further. So I connected with the health food stores. I mean, health food stores then were very funky in comparison to what they are right now. But Dr. Walker, I tracked him down. Dr. Warmbrand, I tracked him down. And between those two, they got me started. And basically, Dr. Walker pointed me to Ann Wigmore. And of course, after that, that was all history. I got off real well. I found a woman of similar heart orientation. And she said to me, says, well, Victor, you can stay and work, 7 days a week, 15 hours a day, or sometimes it's longer, and you'll get paid nothing. And, that was and it says there's no sex on the property. So, and I never left the property. So, who could say no to a sales pitch like that? So I put in close to 7 years, and at that time it was basically a rising sun Christianity, and we knew that we could never be mainstream with a name like that. It was too cultish. So we came up with Hippocrates Health Institute idea, and that was our outreach program. And in those days, we were lucky to have 2 to 3 people come to an audience. That was a big night for us. But time went by quickly. The next thing I know, 7 years are over, and there's some really great heroic leaders stepping up, like Brian Clements, and I basically went off to become, I guess they would call it a hippie. And I started a community, and we were basically involved in emotional detoxification, and that was our area of emphasis, and live foods. And basically, so I was drawn into it by actually the presence of some guideposts like Ann Wigmore, Walker, and other leaders who had already set the initial beginning pathway. And then from there, I knew it was the right thing. And everybody, all my associates thought I was crazy, especially 40 years ago. I mean, to take a lifestyle of not only vegetarianism, but toward raw foods, that was totally insane. And of course, just the last little tidbits, I mean, I was 90 pounds for 2 years. I mean, looked like straight, either anorexic or straight out of a concentration camp. And of course, I still was doing the 18 hours a day schedule and hard physical labor. But you had the energy, the fuel. It's just that the muscles were not evident anywhere but in my head.
Okay.
So anyways, it was a fun life. And that was the thing that attracted me. It was an adventure. That's no other way of putting it. And also the spiritual experiences that were an ever daily part of my life. Thank you.
So,
Brian, do you want a time limit for us?
yeah, well, we'll just interrupt. But just on one note, so thank you, Victoris, so very much. It's nice to know the Marlboro Man had some inspiration. And I know that Victoris used to be at NASA, so now I know why Apollo 13 never made it to land on the moon. But
actually, during the Apollo project, that's when it blew up.
Right. That's the 3 packs of cigarettes, the 20 cups of coffee, no sex, and 15 hours a day. Okay, on the next note, and I would hate to be the next speaker at this point, but so I have to give it to Doc Riley.
No.
All right, Gabriel, please, if you would just let us know that moment of inspiration.
There wasn't one. At the age of 4, Gabriel knew he wanted to be a doctor. Didn't really know what that meant, but we knew that. And pre-puberty began having visions of the Brotherhood of Light and different Essene teachers coming. When I was 16, my older brother was killed in a car accident, and that sent me into deep meditation and really opened up spiritual life and asked really the question, what is this about? And what is the meaning of death as well as life? So had a more serious start, so to speak. And then during that time, I built a heart-lung machine, which won the state science fair. That was in the 50s, so that was like the very beginning. They didn't really have heart-lung machines around. And then my love was football, and really enjoyed playing that. Again, being a heavy meat eater, it was quite appropriate. And after actually getting a pro offer, but never drank, never smoked, always kept really good health because pretty much semi-professional athlete, National Football Hall of Fame type of energy. Then went to Columbia Medical School, where I realized that they didn't have a clue what healing was about. That was a big shock. And then when I realized that nothing was making a lot of sense, I had the good fortune at the age of 33 to receive Shaktipat Kundalini Awakening from Swami Muktananda. And in that very first time in 1975, went very deep into nothing and came out, and a voice rang out and said, you should learn to eat and live in a way that supports the Kundalini energy or the spiritual energy. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And it was from that through exploration, saw that a live food vegan diet was the best diet for supporting spiritual life as well as physical life. And then in that process, started the Tree of Life Rejuvenation Center, did a lot of series of different fasts, and moved into getting a larger mission, which was more about creating world peace and shifting world consciousness. It wasn't like one insight, but we'll say that there was a 40-day fast in there where the last 3 days really didn't have anything, and basically was what we call as Nirvikalpa Samadhi, disappeared for 3 days. And from that came out the next level of mission, which was about world peace. And something we didn't mention the other day, but we have a Peace Every Day initiative, which is we simply ask people to meditate for 7 minutes at the beginning of the day, at sunrise and also sunset, going into inner peace, and then from the place of inner peace, visualizing yourself holding hands with all the peace workers around the planet. And we have over 110 groups around the world, including Muslim groups, Jewish groups, Christian groups, and just groups in general. And it's backed by the Dalai Lama. We have his blessing. And there's a flyer about that out on the table there. So we encourage everybody to participate that, whether you have a particular group or you're just doing it and linking with everybody. And then basically those are the key insights or inspirations. And it's not like we could say Gabriel was motivated. Gabriel was in a sense, it was just the unfolding of that inner truth from age 4 on. It was just taking to different layers of the expression of the one. So that which brings Gabriel right here. And it's very nice to be here and feel the energy of people really wanting to shift not only your own consciousness and mind-body awareness, but also more and more the consciousness of the planet. As it says, if we either choose to do that or we don't really have anything else left to do, which is not really a great alternative. But the reason for doing it isn't out of fear, but it's about because we are the living one. And when we understand where the expression of living one, we let go of the fear part, which could be a survival part, which is an important part of motivation, and we do it for the sense of the oneness, for the sense that we are all connected. And as we shift that consciousness, we shift the consciousness of the planet and heal everybody.
Thank you.
A little bit different tack here. One of the question as it was framed was maybe one part of it was who influenced you to be at the place that you are right now. And again, I would like to echo the sentiments of what has already been said about you showing up. Showing up, and as you probably have heard, the way that that unfolds is to pay attention, to be able to pay attention, to tell the truth about why you're here, and those things that come into your own mind, your own awareness of why you're here, and then not being attached to the outcome. And certainly, you don't want to be attached to any outcome from us, or from myself anyway, speaking to you. But that influence in my life, as I think about, well, what led me from being, from going to that place of being a radio DJ, a journalist, professor, to doing the work that I'm doing now here and in Mexico, working in the field of mind-body medicine, medicinal plants, holistic psychotherapy, how we want to say whatever we do and put those kind of labels on it, not really knowing what all that means, just doing our own particular personal dance and hoping that it has some sort of relevance and meaning. And we have to start from our own core to make that happen, and that's what it's really all about. But there is a particular influential person in my life that created that shift. I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, is where I was born, which is a liability to start off with. That's a tremendous amount of prejudice, bias, limited thinking. I think as a generality, okay, as a generality in certain regions of the country or in certain regions of the world. I had a maternal grandmother who was around until about 5 years ago. At age 104, she departed, okay, in good health. She wasn't vegan. I never saw her go to a gym. She didn't really eat correctly. But what she did do quite properly was she was full of love. And on her 100th birthday, we had all the gathering of all the family and the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. And someone asked her, they said, "Kate, what do you attribute to your longevity?" And she goes, "Oh, I don't know," with kind of a little chortle. And I said, "I know," being the eldest of all the grandchildren. And they looked at me and they said, "What is that?" I said, "She's non-judgmental." She goes, "Oh, I don't know about that." Totally dismissive. That was probably my biggest awakening. Anything that I wanted to do or any action that I took in my life, or any direction that I took, was always supported by her in that non-judgmental way. And to me, that's one of the greatest lessons that we all can have, not only here in this room, but worldwide, and became the contributing factor of leading me to follow my path, to do what I felt was really germane in my heart and in my soul, to be able to take the willingness to make the risk and let everything else be just kind of incidental.
Thank you, Brad. Now, Victoris is known as the father of living foods. This is definitely the queen of living foods. Thank you for gracing us with your presence, and we look forward to finding out of that moment, person, or insight that inspired you.
Thank you. Well, it started more than 50 years ago in Sweden by the Baltic Sea. And, you know, I followed in two women's footsteps, and I'll talk about that. But it really, I wouldn't be here if it didn't happen, what I tell you now. First, my mother was the queen in the kitchen all my life. And then one day she decided to go back to work. And my dad said, I'll pick up the cooking, which was from bachelor life, which was just fried eggs and bacon and things like that. And a pancake that was huge with 15 eggs and I don't know how much bacon. So one day my brother and I came home and we said, Dad, learn to cook, because we were so tired of it. And I don't know what happened. He went to the market. I never had a fresh salad in my life. Who needs it? When you have meat, you have meat or you have fish, you never eat salad. So he made a salad, and it just changed all our life. It was like a bomb fell in the house, and that was the beginning of everything. And then I finished high school, and I just knew I have to go and find somebody to teach me this. This is what I want to do. And of course, there's no school. There was no school really to learn this. So I called around to all the places, all the health clinics in Sweden. And I found this lady not far, a few hours from where we lived. And she had cured herself of rheumatoid arthritis. She had, just like Victoria's, lived in pain all her life. She was the youngest kid of 14, born in Denmark. And, malnourished all her life and lived on medication until one day she was 50 years old. Her whole body was stiff. She walked up and even her jaw had stiffened, so she couldn't even eat anything. And she would actually get some food through her fluid through her teeth. And she was lucky. In her life, there was a couple that had just become vegetarian that heard of her misfortune in the same house that she lived. And they would bring up juices and broths that she could sip through her teeth. And, as the jaw started to open, she became vegan vegetarian, just like they were, and started to study and opened a clinic in Sweden. So I came to her. She had already been in the swing for 30 years and worked night and day, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, I took to it because she had so much to teach me. And, I really didn't know what I was coming there for. And so I felt like a late bloomer, but it just hit me day by day what was going on, what was possible. And, I lived on cloud nine ever since. That we actually are totally have the possibility to cure ourselves, that our immune system has a one-track mind. It wants to heal. It always wants to heal. So, then I met Ann Wigmore when she lectured in Sweden 76, and that was incredible. And she wanted to see a clinic the next day, so she chose us, and we really encountered, we had a great time together. And I didn't know what live food was then, after a 2-hour lecture, what was living food? You thought vegan, everything about vegetarianism, but that was a whole new world that opened. So I knew I had to really go and see her. There was nobody in Sweden then that could teach that. But we did open a living food association in Sweden at our clinic, not knowing really where we were heading, but we were going to learn. So I came over 83 and studied with her, and of course then I met Brian, so then I had to follow him. So I followed 2 women, and then I got a guy to follow. And it was the best thing.
She's not sure what I am yet.
No, exactly. But it was the best thing that happened to me. And of course my life came together, and having children, and it's just been an incredible life. And to be able to share with everybody that comes through the Institute and see how everybody flourish and just be a part of their journey to health. It's just incredible. And it's brought ourselves to our health too. So it's a constant reminder every day, don't take anything for granted. It's
Thank
just
you.
keep it going, keep it rolling.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So Anna Maria was inspired by 2 women. She met Brian, and now we know in front of every great man is an even greater woman.
Front,
And on
behind,
that
and
note-
side. The first memories I have, I was standing at the platform on the stairway in my house outside of New York City lecturing. And my grandparents on both sides were there in the room, and my parents, and they would clap for me. God knows what I was saying. But I knew I was loved. the second experience I remember having, I was in school, and what I was being told, I was constantly challenging. I can't ever remember sitting in a class on any subject I didn't stand up and challenge the teacher on it. Then as time passed in the 1960s, this country, as it finds itself today, was in big trouble. That we were having a rebirth, realizing that our values and our morals were different than what was really happening. And I became heavily involved because I was a musician. From the time I was 5, I took musical lessons and was a jazz drummer with black Americans. Because why? They were the best musicians. They were the people that created it. That simple. And I found myself very, very interested and heavily involved before I knew it in the civil rights movement, and had great admiration for Dr. King, and even for Malcolm X, who scared us enough to listen to Martin King. Before you know it, then we realized we were in a full blast war that we shouldn't have been in Vietnam, and I took a stance as a very young man. In those days, they were taking us out of universities and sending us to Vietnam. And I decided I wouldn't go to Vietnam. And it was very hard because my loving family didn't support that. They were patriots, as I'm a patriot, and said that that was the wrong thing. And I explained to them it's not the wrong thing to do something with no justice behind it. And so what I'm coming to and concluding from all of this is that I was always somebody that questions and challenged things. And why I was able to do that is because I was always loved and supported. I had a family that every day I get up and I thank God I had. Because we sit, Anna and I sit every day, as many of us do, and listen to the stories that a lot of you bring us. I met somebody who influenced me a lot. I was about 20, they were about 30. They were vegetarians. I thought they were completely insane. I was literally thinking I was so bright. I realized one thing I learned, at least in school, that if you didn't eat meat, you'd die, and if you didn't drink dairy, your bones would crumble. And I recall, like at 6 years old, I'd look up at this big teacher that I loved so much, and she would be saying, well, if you don't drink milk, your bones are going to crumble. And then remember the biblical story? What was the town that God struck and it all crumbled? Babylon. Yeah, and I kept picturing, oh my God, my bones are going to crumble just like that biblical thing. Sodom, it was Sodom, yeah. And so, this man was such an influence on my girlfriend and I. I said, well, we've got to try this vegetarian thing, but don't tell my buddies. God forbid you tell my buddies I'm not eating meat. They're going to think I'm a sissy. So we would sort of hide when nobody was around and eat these vegetarian meals, and before you know it, I just instantly in one fell swoop became a vegetarian. I still consumed dairy food, gave up all meat, although I loved it. And as I jokingly say, I like the worst of meat. I used to fry salami. It wasn't bad enough, it was salami. Fry bologna, walk around with a kibasi in my back pocket. Thank God beef jerky. I would have invested in that company at that time.
So you were inspired by salami. So we got Marlboro Man and salami.
Salami guy. So what ends up happening is I started to feel different in my mind and my soul. And my first true feeling of spirituality came, I guess. There's no other way to describe it. Gave up dairy food. That was much more difficult for me because I kept thinking, well, morally I can understand I'm not going to kill an animal, but we're just milking these poor things. And gave up the dairy food and lost the remaining 120 pounds excess that I had. And the fog went out of my mind, and I realized, because of a mentor of mine, that I was going to do work in this. And like Victoris, because we're of a similar generation, it had all the great entrapments in that interesting period in history where they said, you're going to work very hard, that was good. You're going to help people, that was a necessity. And you're not going to be paid because money was bad. So they had all the criteria to do this work. And before you know it, I found myself teaching in my VW, traveling to all 50, not all 50, but many of the 50 states and provinces of Canada. And by the time, because Vic had his legacy ahead of us, now I would get 5 and 10 people showing up at these lectures at this point. When I had 10 people, I would go out in the car and cry. It was, thank you, God, for sending 10 people to listen to me, although 5 left halfway through. Went to visit Hippocrates. My then woman, my girlfriend, and I were literally going to open a center on the Oregon coast. We were going to have families come from about April until October every year and hike with them and put them on vegan diets and get them out into nature. Went to visit Hippocrates because I said to this woman who grew up in Oregon, you better come with me and live somewhere else other than Oregon. I want you to have a world perception, or at least an American perception, and not be stuck in this paradigm that you have. We went out to live in the state of Maine. It reminded her of Oregon. The people are very honest there. They're pure. They look you in the eye. What they tell you, they do. It's a surprise. And we lived there. It started snowing in September. By the time November came, we were pushing our car. It never started because of the battery would go dead. And we went to visit Ann Wigmore. I was just finishing a 40-day fast. And the staff came around, and I started to talk to them. And they said, well, you have to work here. And I said, well, I have no intent of living in this unforgiving climate. I'm going to move to Oregon, and we're going to do this. And at night, I've never heard voices. Other people are lucky, like Gabriel and some of you hear voices. The only time I've ever heard a voice is this night. And I was haunted. I usually sleep like a rock. And I was awakened in the middle of the night and says, you will work at Hippocrates. And I went in the next day very, very reluctantly and said, I'll join the staff. And that's where it started. I've never looked back. I've been blessed by God. The first part of my life, I played music, which I love. And the second part of my life, I play with the love of God and all of you. And I love it.
Thank you.
I've never been asked this question before, so as everybody was talking, I was chronologically going back in my mind because it's a journey. I was a kinesthetic child, always touching older adults and getting a lot of positive feedback. My father was deported when I was 2 years old, so I was raised as an only child, and the chief father figure was my grandfather, who fled Nazi Germany. He was the Bela Karolyi of the 1920s and 30s, when Germany was the chief gymnastic power in the world. He had produced more gold medal winners for the women's German gymnastic team. And he became very outspoken against the Nazis because his 2 best friends were Jews. And when they disappeared, he became more outspoken. They were threatened a lot, and my grandmother told me that, William, you have to stop this. And he wouldn't. And so when she had, behind his back, packed suitcases and was preparing to leave him. And one night they got a call. She had already made contact with the underground, and someone said the Gestapo are coming. And so she went downstairs, she told my grandfather, and he said, well, let him come. And he was a bull of a man, a gymnast himself, a world-class gymnast. And so she went up and got my mother and her brother and went down in the basement, got the suitcase and started to put them in the car and put the car out in the back alley. And she said, I'm leaving you. And he said, what? And he said, I'm leaving you. Just then a car pulled up in front, and she said, I have a suitcase here for you if you want to come. And he looked out, and there was the guys with the black boots and the lightning bolts on their collar, and he thought for a minute and he left. And they made it to Switzerland, and they came to America. And the U.S. Olympic Committee recognized everybody knew who Bill Schwartz was. And so he started training Olympians, and he was not allowed to go to the Olympians in the Olympics because his life was threatened here in the United States when Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals. And he trained, he had 3 girls who he felt could medal, and one won a gold, and one won a silver, and one won a bronze. And they were the first time U.S. women had ever medaled in the Olympics. So I grew up knowing people like Jesse Owens, because before the U.S. Olympic team left, my grandfather addressed the team because he was not allowed to go. He was threatened that he'd be killed if he went back to Germany. And he said to the team that what he felt the essence of being an American was the last 4 letters of American. And when Jesse Owens came back and won the 4 gold medals, he said to my grandfather, he said, I kept thinking, I can, each time I was in the starting blocks. And I want you to know that inspired me. So I grew up knowing Mr. Owens and his passion for excellence. A real turning point in my life, because from a very young age I realized how respected my grandfather was, and he became my father figure. And one day when I was 9 years old, we lived in Newark, New Jersey, and if you've been in Newark, New Jersey, it's a pretty tough place to grow up. And I was playing with a Jewish friend of mine, and I called him a kike. I didn't even know what the word meant, but I knew that Jewish kids got called kikes. And all of a sudden, my grandfather flew out of the front door, picked me up, and right behind him was my grandmother saying, William, you put him down. So he put me down on a cornerstone, and we were this far away, and he said, we're going to have a conversation, and you're never going to forget it. And I can recall that conversation. And it was my first lesson about the value of human beings, the value of respecting human beings. And he told me about my mother's godfather, who was one of the 2 Jewish men who disappeared, and how my uncle's godfather, who was the other Jewish man, and he told me that he felt they were the most humane people in the essence of what it meant to be human, because they were beings of love and beings of truth. And then he said, in your lifetime, you will be exposed to tyranny. And if you are going to be responsible for healing that, he said, you cannot be silent, because silence in the face of tyranny will make you insignificant as a human being. I've thought about those words many times, especially when I was in Vietnam. So I always was touching people, and I remember massaging him and getting a lot of positive feedback when I was a child, and I was a very kinesthetic child. I at a very young age, had to touch people. And in touching my grandfather, I realized that people of integrity felt different than people who didn't have integrity. I could feel that energy, and I was very, very familiar with it. When I went to Vietnam, I was a member of the Green Berets Fifth Special Forces Group, and one night they brought a man in who'd been shot by a sniper. And myself and another Green Beret medic were trying to revive him, and I was giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and I felt his soul leave because my lips were touching his lips, and it went right up through my lips. And it so shocked me, I looked back just in time to see his eyes upturned. And the other doctor said, what are you doing? We're losing him. And I said, he's gone. And he said, what? And I said, I just felt his soul leave. Being a kinesthetic person and having a kinesthetic experience like that, especially touching your lips to someone, and we all are loved, but the moment that our essence leaves, then even the people who love us can't wait for our bodies to be put in the ground. And so that was my first experience in spirituality. And I realized that we were more than just physical beings. Shortly thereafter, I was shot down in a helicopter and broke my back in 3 places. And I could not be evac'd out from where we were. And so my first exposure to natural healing was the Montagnard tribesmen that I was with and worked with, who used poultices and things to heal my back. And after my back healed in a very short period of time, by the way, I worked with 2 tribes called the Rade and Uglai tribes. There were 12 Montagnard tribes. These 2 tribes were vegetarians. They were terrible fighters. As a matter of fact, they were the peacemakers between the other 10 tribes. And I probably am one of the few Western people who ever got to see some of their religious ceremonies. I saw people levitate in front of my eyes. That experience changed my life further spiritually. Then later I was hurt again more seriously and came back to the States just in time to watch my mother die. It was her 3rd reoccurrence of cancer, and she was a chain smoker. And I remember not one of her physicians ever telling her to stop smoking. And so I thought that I would become a healer, and she was undergoing radiation therapy, and so I became a radiation therapist. I was educated at the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry. And the defining moment that caused me to leave conventional medicine was when we got a $10 million grant from the American Cancer Society and the Department of Energy to use cesium-130, which is a byproduct of making nuclear weapons. They had this problem where in this Hanford Indian Reservation, it had eaten through steel caskets and contaminated the Columbia River and killed millions of fish, and the Indians were upset, and so they had to find something to do with this. So they decided to use for food irradiation and use it instead of cobalt-60, which was a very stable radiation source that we were using came from Canadian reactors, and I became contaminated. Everybody in the project became contaminated, and these people were dying, and they were, I spent a whole weekend. I'd see them, their lips were blue, their fingernails were blue. I spent the whole weekend checking their hematocrits, and they were dropping through the floors. And so Monday morning I went to the head radiologist, whose name was George Barron, and I said, we have to stop this project. We're killing these people. And he said, what do you mean? And so I showed him everything, and he spent a few minutes flipping through it, and I had yellow highlighted all their hematocrits and all the symptoms of radiation poisoning, which we couldn't cone down. And he said, well, Paul, we can't stop this program. I said, why not? He said, well, most of these people are terminal, and if we don't offer them something, they'll turn to quackery. And I said, what do you mean quackery? And he said, you know, nutrition and stuff like that. Now, I had never equated nutrition to quackery, but I didn't know anything about nutrition at that point in time, except that while I was in Vietnam with the Rade and Uglai tribes and I lived with them, they were vegetarians and the other 10 tribes weren't. And so I ate what they ate and my lifelong allergies went away somehow. And I remember my first R&R, I went to Taiwan, the first thing I ordered was a big steak, and the next day I had all these allergies back. And I said, I wonder if this has anything to do with that meat. So when I came back, I was converted to being a vegetarian, which mostly was like donuts and Coors or something.
Okay. On that note,
So I guess the conclusion of that was that from that moment on, I became interested in nutrition, and the journey continues.
thank you, Paul. Paul is one of the most courageous people I know, and is one of my living heroes. And I really admire your ability to, challenge many of the issues that many of us don't have the courage to do yet. And so I thank you very much for I Can, which is a part of being an American, and I'm sure a lot of people echo that. So thank you, Paul. And as all of the people who've spoken so far, they're all real heroes of all of us in their own way. And now I have a friend who many of you don't know. Many of you are familiar with the people who've introduced themselves. Michael and I did some work together at Madison Square Garden as Brian Clement joined us about 10 years ago when we did an event there. And he wrote an interesting book called Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And it's in about 5 different countries at least. Languages, also 5 different languages. And so I'd just like you all to welcome Michael. And Michael will just give us that inspiring moment.
Thank you, thank you. Delighted to be here. That was vegetarian beer, was it? I want to acknowledge your courage for what you spoke up about today in your session. And I want to help fund that, and I'd like to know who to write a check to and how, and invite everybody to fund that conference because I think it's urgent that we do it. So that'll be.
Well, no, that's okay. We'll send a notification, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks.
cool. Great. How did it all start? Took a lot of courage to do what you did today. Well, the first year of my life, I was almost dead 3 or 4 times. And the first 25 years, I had this miracle profession that really took care of me called medicine. And I lived on an inhalator and pills. I then found naturopathic medicine. I had a background at that point in electronics with a side study in physics. And when I sat and started to study naturopathy, what became clear to me was everything I'd learned in the world of physics applied to mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health, nutrition, all of it. It was all part of an energy system. So I started to move in that direction with naturopathy. A few years later, I was introduced to a text, or actually a language called Aramaic. And as I sat and I listened to this man talking about the Aramaic language, what clicked in my brain was the Aramaic language was a physics language. It wasn't a theological language, though it was the source language of at least 5 of the world's major religions. And I think the reason is because they understood from the perspective of physics how the world worked. It had nothing to do with theology. Humans came along and made theology out of it and turned it into something that it was not. But they knew how it worked. And so that's kind of the, sort of a backdrop for what I do. About maybe 10 or 11 years into my own healing process, working and doing my own work, I had an experience of going back and remembering being about 3 months of age and knowing exactly why I was here, and it was to do what I do today. And it took me about another 6 years to walk away from the business world, which I'd been inculcated with, and begin doing this work full time. And I've been doing that now for about the last 34, 35 years on a full-time basis. 20 years ago, developed a center in the Ozarks in southern Missouri, a place called Heartland, where we do residential intensive work. And the basic idea is to support people in returning to their essence. Has anybody here ever held a newborn child? Anybody? If you were to go back and tap in, you know, that first 24 hours, if you were to tap into that newborn, what would your word be for the essence of that newborn? Anybody? Love? Angel?
Purity.
Purity? Innocence. Now, I've asked this question of tens of thousands of people from many different cultures, and 100% of the time, the answer is always some variation on the theme of love. You might remember a spiritual or a scriptural statement that said, "Do not be molded by the world, or you will end up moldy." Remember that one? Okay, it didn't exactly go like that. But in essence, that was the message. And the specialty of the world is to make sure that our essence is killed. My experience is that the average human being in this culture is dead by the age of 4. It takes another 70 or 80 years for their bodies to fall over. Because the world fills us with its realities, with its frequencies, with its energies that don't belong here. And we carry with us at least 4 generations of those old realities. If you go back into the Aramaic language, as opposed to the Greek, where most of our scriptural understanding comes from in this culture, in the Greek language, we're told that all you have to do is, you know, there's that rotten person over there that did that rotten thing to you, and that's why you're not experiencing love. That's why you're in pain, and all you have to do is forgive them, and then everything will be all right. Has anybody ever noticed that everything isn't all right when you do that? Doesn't work. That's not it. If you go back into the ancient Aramaic language, forgiveness is the exact reverse of that. It's the tool with which you go inside yourself and remove from your field which does not belong in your field. Has anybody ever done anything you regret having done? Anybody here ever done a regret? Tap in for a second. Think about one situation where you did something you regret, and then identify and use a word to describe what you were feeling. Anybody? Angry? Anybody? Sadness? Say again? Panic. Without taking a lot of time, I've asked this question of tens of thousands of people. Guess what? Notice the word love doesn't show up. It never has from anybody. When we go into any form of hostility or fear, it's because there's an energy in our physiology of hostility or fear. It's got nothing to do with anyone else. And forgiveness is how you remove it. When hostility or fear is active in the human mind, it's a drug, it anesthetizes us, and our mind lies to us. Forgiveness is about undoing the lie and restoring us to our original nature. That's what we'll be doing tomorrow. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael.
Delighted.
Okay. We had one more question to ask all our panelists, but since less is more, we're going to go right to Q&A. And we'd like you to take this opportunity to ask a question that you feel that one of these distinguished panelists can answer. So is there someone here who has a question for any member of our panel? Or for the panel as a whole? Okay, great, I do. I knew I was going to get an opportunity. My question is, if there was one particular thing that you would recommend that would empower people to sustain a healthy lifestyle during this time and age, what would that be?
My input would be that the absence of love is a disease and there's no health without it. That a state of health is a state of conscious, active, present love. And if there's anything less than love that you're experiencing, you have work to do. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. You know, there's a guy 2,000 years ago that said, "Why are you trying to take the speck out of your brother's eye?" Well, you have a beam in your own. If you're in any form of hostility or fear, if your physiology can produce any form of hostility or fear, then you have generations of hostility and fear, and you got to put an end to it.
Thank you. I want to pass it down. Gabriel, would you take a stab at that question? Or Sprout?
Waking up to the illusion that we are separate from God, which does bring us, of course, to love, but it's the dream illusion that there's a separate identity from the one. And in that waking up, we become free. We become, we're born originals. Most people die copies, which is what was just said, and we become an original again.
Thank you. The illusion of separateness.
What was the question?
The question, Dr. Edwin Riley, is if there was one particular thing that you would recommend that our guests, embark upon, or a skill or tool that they implement or practice that would empower them to sustain a healthy lifestyle, what would that tool, skill, or thing be?
Okay, what I'd like everybody to do, just for 1 second, is to just close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. Take your right hand, hold it in front of your body, and wherever you feel your breath, let that hand rise to that place or sink to that place where you feel the breath. Without removing your hand, I'd like for you to open up your eyes and look around the room and look at where you're holding your hand and notice where it is. So the sustenance of life is with the breath. And many of the hands are held up around the throat area or sometimes higher. And I've been and asked the same question before, and oftentimes it's even in the forehead or even outside the body. And when you were talking about the child and watching the newborn baby, the belly is always expanding on the in-breath and contracting on the out-breath. That rhythm is oxygenating the entire body and keeping the body from having these places where it's not receiving the nourishment and the nurturing of the healthiest of all foods that we have on this planet, which is oxygen. So my thought on that question is to remind ourselves that the vital life force is the breath, and to breathe from the abdomen, the lower abdomen, expanding the belly on the in-breath, and exhaling on the out-breath as an afterthought, like a feather floating from the sky on a very still day.
Thank you, Edwin. So we have connecting to love, letting go of the illusion of separateness, and breathing. And then there's something we need to add.
Yeah, I have to add something here. When you let go of the illusion of the separate self, our natural human emotions begin to flower. One is non-causal love, love without a cause, non-causal peace, non-causal contentment, and non-causal joy. These are a natural human state that just comes from us and are really associated with all healing.
Thank you for that clarification. Brian.
If we could all just develop more self-respect. Self-respect raises us, and the way that that's achieved is perpetual integrity. The word integrity meaning to aspire for greatness and fulfillment at all moments of your life.
Okay, Victorious, be good, be easy on us.
This is a quickie. Minimalism. Basically, we got always more than enough, both nourishment, more than enough energetics. If we could only appreciate the goodness that it surrounds us, we have a tendency to be exaggerated both in our eating habits, not giving time, rest between our meals. If we just ate much less and enough to supply what we really need physically, not comfort food-oriented emotionality, which reflects the lack of the cohesiveness and integration and holism, connectedness to that one source, this spiritual network of your love, boundless manifestation, where you're living in fear, food ends up becoming the ultimate drug and medicine of choice. So by tapping into that inner freedom, you'll find that also there'll be comfort in minimal nourishment, in minimal needs, and you will have more than enough to fully become realized as an individual, no matter how large or your needs might be. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we need to remember every day starts new and fresh.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next question.
In India, the highest value that human being can practice is ahimsa, which means nonviolence in thought, word, and deed. And if you can do that, you can be healed in anything and of anything.
Thank you. Okay, if someone would like to come to the microphone, any questions? Was that you, Michelle? Oh, no? Okay, come on up, please. You do. Just say your name and where you're from, and then your question.
I'm Barbara. I'm from Port Charlotte, Florida, and I'm very new to this. And it's I know that I needed to be here, though, and I just have some question on, you know, I am not a vegetarian, but where do you get the protein? I mean, is it all in the live food? My mind hasn't gotten to that point yet, and I wondered if somebody could help me with that.
The way that that Victoris, Gabriel, Anna Marie, and I, who work with living food every day, would all tell you and propose to you is if you eat the way that we're suggesting, this is the most protein-rich diet on the planet Earth. There's no more available protein source than protein that's, in many cases, broken down from a complex to simple amino acids, which are fully and easily digested by the body. It comes from simple foods like sprouts that you're eating there today. Two of the sprouts that were on the table tonight were complete proteins, renowned complete proteins. Algae, as an example, both freshwater and saltwater. And believe me, you won't lack protein on this. What you'll lack is disorder on every level.
Gilbert really agrees with what Brian said. There's another point. Mostly people get too much protein. And the second thing is when you cook protein, according to the Max Planck Institute, you lose 50% of it. So there's some other problems. And the third thing is that we have unique constitutions that make us uniquely different. And some people need very, very, very little protein, and some people need more protein. Both can be adequately supplied on a vegan live food diet, but if you eat too much protein, it actually, in your constitution, genetically is saying you need a little protein, you can actually create an imbalance. So it's very important to know whether your person needs a high amount of protein or a low amount of protein, both of which you can get. But some of us... Well, that's a longer discussion. In the book Conscious Eating, there's a whole chapter on how to individualize your diet and whether you're a fast oxidizer, slow oxidizer, parasympathetic, sympathetic. And there's patterns, and there's a whole history form you can fill out. And that would be what I'd recommend you getting.
We do clinical blood tests at the institute, and when you're there for 3 weeks, you have one when you come and when you leave. And it's never been a problem with protein. Actually, a lot of people come in with very, very high protein or very, very low protein. And in both cases, they are stunned because they eat a good amount of protein, and especially the ones that are very low protein. can't understand how they can be low. Like normally, let's say you should be 6.5 to 7 in total protein, which is albumin and globulin together. And a lot of people come in 5.5, and they tell me, I eat meat 3 times a day. How is it possible? And then you have, and then you also have the ones that eat meat 3 times a day, then might come in at 8.5, which is incredibly high. So what we see with our diet is that with the living food diet, it will normalize. It will come down to where it should be. And, of course, the longer we can follow, we can see, of course, if you have enough, and we can modify your diet. But it's really never been a problem. It's amazing.
I think one of the things that's important to recognize in our culture is that the big money foods are protein foods. They get a lot of brainwash, a lot of publicity. But if you just add 2 and 2, a cow starts out at birth around 100 pounds, and in less than a year, eating a mono diet of grass, weighs 2,000 pounds of pretty solid beef. You don't need much protein. It's a whole sales pitch. Most of the diseases of our culture are protein excess diseases. And what we need to be doing is getting rid of it and looking at what this system really needs. And it doesn't need a lot of dead animals.
In response to your question about how do you know, like we have this, the body is with this infinite wisdom and the innate intelligence that we have. If we learn how to really pay attention through different aspects of mindfulness, practices, meditation, both formal and informal, so that we become observers and we eavesdrop on the conversation taking place between the mind and the body. So the body starts humming as you are maybe perhaps doing your grocery shopping in the organic food section. And it will direct you on what enzymes your body needs. And if you really listen to that and become acutely aware, then it will give you the answers that you need to know.
Thank you. And thank you very much for that question. It's one of the most pervasive questions. I'm sure the panelists would agree that they're challenged by, and I've heard the answers for years, and because we're so brainwashed and inoculated, oh, you don't get enough protein, that it really takes being reminded and hearing the answers over and over again. So thank you for that question. I saw someone in the back. Can you please come up front?
I'm going to think of the hardest thing possible. I'm going to fall down here. I'm Stuart McLean. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I had a question about what could be causing tinnitus. I have a slight problem with that. I notice that pretty much just when I'm getting ready to go to sleep, and I did buy a book on it, but it didn't really seem to help me much.
Thank you for the question. The question was about tinnitus, which is ringing in the ear. Tinnitus, or whatever.
I pronounced it wrong.
That's all right. Join the club.
Can you, excuse me, could you just stand right there and face us for a minute, just in a relaxed position? With your arms down, just. Okay. All right, you see how his head is tilted very far to the right, his right, and it's off-center. There's only a small orifice which the auditory nerve passes through. You'll see that his one eye is lower, his left eye is considerably lower than his right eye, and his left ear is considerably lower than his left ear. This is cranial distortion. So these orifices, which are only very small, he needs to have his cranium from a manual medicine point of view corrected. You see, always tilts to the right because he's trying to counterbalance. I think his left leg is, or his right leg is short, his left hip is high. And that distortion is working its way into his cranium. Have you ever had an injury to your cranium?
No, but
No.
I blew my eardrum out once when I was snorkeling.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that wouldn't do what the amount of distortion
I've been
that.
a runner for 30 years.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I've got occasional adjustments, from a chiropractor.
Yeah, it's a tinnitus aurorium is one of the most.
It started,
Yeah.
a year ago. I never had it.
Right. Well, the laws of gravity are the laws of gravity, and if you have a structural imbalance, you can close those orifices over time. And especially, see, there's a reason why he keeps doing that, why he keeps tilting his head that way. Actually, he's trying to take this plane and write the fluid, the labyrinth, and make it level.
I thought it was simpatico.
And so you would greatly benefit from some cranial balancing. And who can do that?
Have you trained anyone in his area?
Where do you live? Pittsburgh. Okay, if you'll see me later, I'll direct you some people who can correct that. Okay?
That's a common problem. We're common daily.
Yeah. Yeah, there are biochemical reasons also, by the way.
Anything nutrition-wise
Yeah.
that could be an issue with respect to
Pardon?
anything nutrition-wise?
Yes, you can address that. You notice that your left eye is much more squinted than your right eye? Yeah. That's all part of that pressure on that side of your head.
What we're finding is that this is caused, as many diseases and disorders, because of the biochemical havoc that's playing a major role in our biochemistry today. And that has to do with higher amounts of microbes, new forms of microbes that didn't exist a short time ago, bacterium, viral diseases, parasites, amoebas, and as, if not the most important, toxins from chemicals, which in most cases leave residue from heavy metals behind. One of the most important books, and of course those of you who have visited Hippocrates, that has ever been written on that particular subject was published by a friend, Randolph Fitzgerald. And we'd like to give you that homework to read, and this is something that you should very much read. It's called The 100-Year Lie. And this is a brilliant writer who has made it not only his professions, but he's gifted at it. And he subjected himself to a lot of internal research on poisoning and delved as an investigative reporter into the subject like nobody else has ever delved into. So clean up the body, but most important, what Paul said to you is absolutely a necessity, and I would say immediately. That's most vital.
Thank you, Brian. I think in one of the advantages to having all our panelists here is there's so many different approaches, and then one might be more obvious than the other. Coincidentally, I had that for about 8 years, and it was just normal to me. And then I've had a session with a holographic repatternist, and they took a pitchfork and matched a particular note, a tuning fork. We call that a Connolly.
He was satanic, by the way.
Yeah. You'll notice we don't have any holographic repatterners on this panel. So a tuning fork matched a note, and then it went away permanently, so to speak. But I noticed whenever I had a lot of white sugar, it would come back again. So by keeping that, at bay, I've never had a recurrence. And I believe, Victoris, didn't you have a session of ringing in your ears? No. Okay, so that was a myth. Okay. Yeah. Give it to Gabriel. Give it to Gabriel.
Everything that has been said is very important as tinnitus as a disease. When the Kundalini is awakened, sometimes we get a thing called Nada Yoga, and there's 10 divine sounds, and one sounds like tinnitus. And so if you happen to get it while you're meditating or other times, you should be, it could be thunder, it could be just a high pitch. So it's not always pathology. It actually, what you do is you follow to the very source of the sound. And there's a whole yoga based on that called Laya Yoga. And so it's not like an uncommon thing. So it's just good to have a broader perspective. That's why we're all here, to see. Yeah, so it could be if it only happens when you meditate, that may be what's going on. I don't think that's the case in this thing.
You may die from all of these therapies put together.
But also, the other thing is in a simple way, that the fasting is very helpful to clear a lot of this stuff. And that's like a very, very simple approach. But certainly I would do the body work and do the cranial sacral therapy and other work. There we go.
Thank you, Gabriel. Another question in the back? Let's do this question. We'll get you again. And your name and where you're from first.
Hi, my name is Michelle Riel, and I'm from Toronto, Canada. We've talked a lot about, or I've heard a lot about spirituality, about oneness with God. And maybe, Gabriel, I'm not sure if you can possibly start with this. I'd like to know if you could talk a little bit and give me your thoughts about our relationship with the afterlife and potential communication with the possibility of communication.
It's possible. You know, we live in different worlds, and in the Kabbalah we have really 4 different worlds. In the world of Yitzhak is called the astral plane, and that is where that kind of communication happens. In the different traditions, we'll all talk about the astral plane using different terms. The world of the ancestors, if you're Native American. And there are different ways to access that world, for sure. So it is there, those energies are there, and if you have a particular interest, that's good, but generally speaking, it's good to kind of go through the astral plane. That's also where the angels hang out, so to speak, and go to other worlds, the world of Beriah, pure mind, and ultimately absolute, where you really experience your oneness with God. And that's really the bigger point. But yes, it's absolutely there. We'll say absolutely because you'll see it in every culture where people are able to communicate with the ancestors in different levels, either through a medium or through themselves directly.
Most often when the guests come to Hippocrates, they say when they enter through the gate, they feel a calm, a sense of calm. And I was puzzled by that for a long time, and finally, a number of years ago, came to the conclusion that even those people who came through the program and then ascended to go on, somehow left a depth of soul on that property. And it has nothing to do with what we do as individuals or the staff or the program does. It's the gathering together of all of those souls. So in our work every day, physically in our environment, we see visible communication with those who have passed.
What we're talking about is a haunted house. But the truth is, if beings live in difficult ways, that really does exist. There is a place, a hot springs out in Arizona, which was where many people have been killed and had been used as a house of prostitution. It had been a Native American healing spot. And when Gabriel went there, says, "This is not a healthy place.
That's a spotted background."
Bad things are going to happen here." And sure enough, people were using drugs, and some guy decided that whatever, and he shot himself. He shot several other 2 naturopaths. I mean, it was a bad scene, and it was because those spirits directly. I mean, Gabriel predicted this was going to happen, and said you really have to clean it up because there are ways to depossess the whole area. So understand those things really do exist. They can have both a positive effect, like Brian's saying, because of the nature of the place, but they can also have a detrimental effect. We shouldn't think that's superstition. I mean, this is a predictable event. It actually happened. 3 people died, and they got in drugs. Drugs and alcohol do bring open the aura to be infected by these kind of energies. So we should not think about it as superstition, but as a fact in the world of Yetzirah, in the world of the astral plane. It's just a fact.
Thank you very much. Eric, you have a question?
Yeah, question for Brian.
Oh, I guess you don't have to hit the microphone. We know who Eric is. Go ahead.
Question for Brian. We're speaking about life and death, and like I want to take it a little bit further with life on Earth. And we've addressed this question before on a panel discussion. Talk about the passing of the life and how someone on Earth will actually walk into a room or walk into an environment, and there's pheromones that are obviously present, and people can actually feel their spirit in the room because of the pheromones. If you could just elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, this is this is an interesting subject that has been unfortunately tainted by a lot of mystical New Age propaganda. That's the only terms I can use. But there's solid evidence in science and quantum science on this. I don't think we have to get into that on a cerebral level. Any of us who have had the fortune to visit Notre Dame in Paris, as an example, or the Vatican, or the Western Wall in Jerusalem, where you can actually sit there within a matter of feet, look up, and that's where Muhammad ascended. Turn, that's where Christ carried the cross. And the Western Wall is one of the most holy places for the Jewish people, where they come to resolve and change consciousness. And when you're in a place like that, it is abundantly clear that the intent of that particular spot and environment has captured and collected for millennia, in these cases, the souls, the heart, and the intention of people. Those people that have left us and that we have fond memories of, we spoke about some when Paul spoke about his grandfather. It was so touching. We were all touched by that. We were feeling Paul's grandfather. When we listen to Mozart, I mean, I've never listened to Mozart where I don't smile and I don't laugh and my heart doesn't just dance around in my body. And I said, my God, Mozart has been gone for 300 years. Mozart's affecting me. You know, this is the amazement of it. As Anna Maria spoke about Elma Nissen, her first mentor, and Ann Wigmore. Ann Wigmore sits here with us tonight, and without Ann Wigmore, many of us on this panel wouldn't be here tonight. So, sure it exists, and you are part of all humanity. From the very first humans that existed, they are all our family. And so if we remember that, we gain strength from those things we don't see, as well as wonder from those things we don't see.
Thank you, Brian. I think it goes back to what was repeated, that illusion of separateness. We're also connected to what you've been speaking about, as well as the people living on the planet. One more question, possibly two. Okay, so we got three. Okay, well, let's make them, we'll start with you, and then this lady here, and the lady in the back, and then we'll be done. Your name and where you're from.
Okay.
Speak right next to the microphone.
I can't use the microphone. There we go. I put nothing. My name's Peggy Katsopoulos, and I'm also from Toronto, Canada. My question is, I guess I've witnessed examples of many people who have healed themselves, and just hearing today, we know many people who have almost died 5 times and have healed themselves. So I guess there's still a lot of mainstream medicine, and it's not helping and it's not healing, yet the majority of people in this world resort to, or the majority of people that I know resort to mainstream medicine. And I guess it's frustrating because I can see people, I have witnessed people, I've met people who have healed themselves. So how do we, what still needs to be done, and what can we do to make self-healing mainstream?
Very good question, thank you. Who would like to take that?
Everybody who heals themselves. A number of years ago, I have many of examples of people that I see who have been to places like the Mayo Clinic, the Ochsner Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, these bastions of conventional medicine, and they haven't been helped. And they've come to us and they heal. So I decided about 5 years ago to take 100 people who healed and 100 people who I didn't help and analyze what was the difference. And I found basically it was three things, which I use an anagram, WEC, W-E-C. The first thing is that everybody who healed wanted to heal. Now, how do you know if everybody who comes says they want to heal? Here's how you can tell the difference. People who want to heal are proactive. That is, they always ask you, what can I do to help me? They seek more information. A proactive person is somebody who does everything that they can do and that they're capable of doing. A reactive person wants it done to them. That's a very, very big difference, because a proactive person will take responsibility, and the word responsibility means response-able. That's how I distinguish whether a person wants to heal. Secondly, the E part. It takes energy to heal. Not all energies heal. The energies of fear, of doubt, of cynicism, that doesn't heal anything. The energies of love and faith and belief. But the person has to be able to create positive energy within themselves. That's very important. Because we've all had the experience of people eating the best foods and they still don't heal. Some people don't heal. What makes somebody healable? And the answer is that we all have to be able to generate positive energy within ourselves. We're all capable of it, and this gets into the mental, emotional part of healing. Because if your thoughts are about as positive as stomach flu, good luck. So our mental, emotional part of us is extremely important in how we heal. And the ability to generate positive energy within ourselves is part of the problem. And the last thing to see is, are people willing to change? The first thing I look at is, are they educatable? That's extremely important to be able to teach. The word doctor comes from the word indoctrination, which means to teach. A true doctor is a true teacher. Almost everything everybody here does is teach. You go to a Hippocrates Institute, you're taught. And you're taught a new way of being, and it's important to recognize that there's a place within us that is the truth and knows the truth and recognizes truth. And if you hear truth enough, that place becomes awakened and effulgent and hopefully receptive. That's very important. There's a place that is in us that is love, knows love, and recognizes love. And we have to allow that in. We have to allow it in so that we can emit it. When we start emitting love, then we heal. The father of medicine, Hippocrates, said no one gets well without entheos. Entheos is the root derivation of the word enthusiasm. There's the energy, which literally in the Greek means possessed by God. So as I said earlier in my lecture, if you were to ask me what to name the power that heals, is I would say light, life, love, and truth. That's what heals. And anyone who can bring that forth and help you to bring that forth will heal you.
Thank you. Actually, we only have a couple more minutes, so we're going to go to the next question, which was this lady here. Thank you.
My name is June Fitzgerald. I'm from Montreal. My question has to do with protecting ourselves against electromagnetic fields. I think maybe everybody has one idea on this. Maybe everybody in the panel has their own way.
Very good question. Thank you.
The foremost thing that we must do is disconnect. We, most of the day now, spend our time with a cell phone stuck to our head, or a wireless home phone to our head, or a computer on our lap, or sitting in front of a laptop computer. And although these technologies are remarkable and have raised us to a whole different understanding and communication, these are highly dangerous devices. So the first thing to do is to reduce the use of all of this, and certainly the unnecessary use. To entertain yourself with a computer, to me, is a little abstract. I see people sitting on planes all the time watching movies with these laptops on their seats. So that would be the first thing as far as I'm concerned.
One other person on that question, please. Electromagnetic fields.
Cover all your windows with aluminum foil, your bed, and sleep under the bed.
No. Okay. Thank.
Well, he just handed me the phone, so everything's true. We definitely, the Russian research is probably the most advanced, showing that really electromagnetic fields are very, very detrimental. And so we need to minimize it. We use a variety of things, but tachyon seems to be very good. Converting AC chaotic current, which is what AC current is, to coherent current, and that seems to significantly minimize the negative effects of computers and so forth and so on, and even putting it over your fuse box. So this is a very, very simple technology that makes tachyon, which is it's energy going faster than the speed of light, but basically these tachyon disks act as antennas to focus the energy, so the destructive part of an AC current becomes coherent and therefore no longer destructive.
And if you need further information on some of these products, you can go to several of the speakers' websites, and they'll be able to elaborate. What was the last? Who's the last person?
So wait. Okay. I actually have to talk about healing, because I don't want us to leave with the idea or to feel guilty with a limited definition of healing, because everything was said is true, but there's another kind of healing which is on the spirit level. Now, there have been a variety of, quote, enlightened beings in India who died of cancer. How did that happen? Possibly it was their time. And they were in complete peace and they were completely healed. My mother, who died of cancer when Gabriel was 33, was not interested in any particular Western techniques or anything. She just wanted her lax and bagels and don't bother me, but what was interesting to her, what was important to her, was just to be surrounded by the field of love. And Gabriel worked with her very intensely. We really had a wonderful, every death is a rebirth when you're understanding it at a certain level. And she came to me the night before in the astral plane and wanting help, and we'd been preparing for weeks. And we were able, it was her birthday, and I read her a beautiful poem. I kissed her with great love. She went to sleep and never woke up. Great death. I mean, wow. So she left in a very high spiritual state, a very wonderful spiritual state. Now, is that a healing? Or is that a loss? You see? And the fact is, from Gabriel's point of view, that was a wonderful healing. She was ready to go. Cancer of the pancreas, age 63. She was done. She had done what she needed to do on the planet, and this is her way out, and she healed with a beautiful angelic smile on her face. That's a healing. So we should consider that death is not necessarily a defeat. It's just how we perceive it.
Thank you for that, Gabriel.
Keep that in mind.
Okay, we had one last question, and it's going to be answered very quickly because we have a lot of crew coming in here at exactly a minute. So come on down and ask your question.
Hi, good evening. My name is Esther Benzayan. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, and thank you. I'm from Miami Beach, and as a mother of 4 children, and recognizing your long journey to wisdom, and mine definitely, trying to save my kids. Oh, I see. Really optimistic, right? From, you know, everything that right now they have to encounter in television, you know, electromagnetic fields, you know, everything that is surrounding them, and knowing what I'm knowing, but still I'm their mother, and you know what kids do, yeah, mommy. You know. What is the thing that you would say is a good technique or a good solution that, or suggestion to have a healthier spiritual, physical, emotional life for kids?
It's a great question. Thank you very much. And one that we all have to be so concerned about, because it's that generation that's going to carry on all of our, our futures and legacies. So I guess a parent is going to answer this one.
We, like you, have 4 children. 2 of them are here. My oldest son is here, and my youngest child, who's a son, is here. If you surround your children with love and constantly allow them to have a sense of security, and don't squelch their creativity or their interest, you can't make them monks or nuns in our society and culture. So what you literally have to do is to allow them to venture into those things that may not be what we think are best for them, but in a loving way and always in an educational way, not in a parental way as we tend to be overbearing sometimes, to explain to them why those things aren't as good. Practical, find other families that live in this similar way. Let your children be with other children. You're the parent. No matter what, you're going to be an enigma to them. You're always going to be the parent. As much as you love them and respect them, and eventually they'll get old enough and realize who you are, they're going to reject what you say. So you need to make this hip. Have other kids, other families, like mom and dad aren't the only oddballs. Or, hey, a slew of other oddballs around here. Maybe mom's not wrong. And that's going to be a big, big help for you.
Anna, would you care to address that?
Well, you know, spending time with your children and just being there. I think we spend every second of our free time, and also at work. Our kids are brought up at work. They've seen what happens when people can open themselves and explore health and spirituality and everything. So our kids have been very much fortunate to be around that all their life. Mainly, I think you just got to be true. You just got to be yourself. And of course, the more you educate yourself, the more benefit your children are going to have of what you learned.
Gabriel's children are a little bit older, 37 and 33. 34, actually.
And we have a few seconds for
Yeah.
this.
Basically, the most important thing we can give our children is love, which builds unconditional love, which builds their self-esteem, and at the same time, clear direction. And the second thing, which Gabriel wants to really support Brian in this, is that what we've created at the Tree of Life Rejuvenation Center is a garden-centered live food peace school. So the kids will be surrounded by peers and by an environment that totally supports the way of life, so it appears a natural way of life, which of course it is. And those two things, I think, are the key. But the most important is love, but with a very clear, you being authentically you and sharing who you are, so they know that there are boundaries, not unconditional, thoughtless love. That's not really compassion, because it's not with understanding.
Thank you. And really, everybody, please join me in a round of applause for our distinguished panelists.